Doping and hooligans. How dirty is Russian sport? That's our topic today on Quadriga. Welcome. It was a hard blow for Russian athletes. World Athletics governing body, the IAAF, said that Russia's track and field team should be excluded from the Summer Olympics because of widespread doping. The International Olympic Committee now says that some modifications may be possible, but it looks like many Russian athletes may not be going to Rio. Last week, European soccer authorities fined the Russian Football Union €150,000 in connection with violence by Russian fans during a match against England at Euro 2016. And now the ban on Russian athletes. Some Russian sports officials are suspected of encouraging doping or at least covering it up. Many Russians say the treatment is unfair and they feel their country is being singled out. So how widespread is doping in Russian sports? That's what we want to talk about this week on Quadriga with three guests who are following the story closely. It's a pleasure to welcome Anna Rosa. She covers Germany for the Russian newspaper Rossiyskaya Gazeta. She says collectively punishing all Russian track and field athletes without individual proof of guilt would be very wrong and only deepens the divide between Russia and the West. Hajo Seppelt is a reporter for the German public broadcaster WDR and author of an acclaimed German documentary series on illicit doping. He says the doping crisis utterly discredits organized sport. Russia is certainly an egregious example, but there are other countries that are just lucky no one's blown the whistle on them so far. And Alan Posner is with us. He's a political commentator for the newspaper Die Welt. And he says doping, corruption, and hooliganism are problems that go beyond Russia. The problem is that in Russia, the state is on the side of the criminals. So a warm welcome to all of you. Anna Rosa, you say that a blanket ban is wrong, but the IAAF's decision was unanimous, and in fact, it gave Russia plenty of time to react. Russia had 6 months to clean up a clearly tainted system of checks and balances. Now, I know that you were a runner in earlier years. You did also compete. If you look back on that time, wouldn't you say that for an athlete, it is nearly impossible to go into a race against others where you don't know whether the entire system that they're working within might, in fact, tolerate doping?
I don't know that there is plenty time before the Olympia that the Olympian Committee has said that Russia is guilty of doping its athletes. I think it's probably true that some of athletes has taken doping, but I don't know that this measure is very profitable for the sport, for the athletic of the world.
Hajo Seppelt, it was your film, in fact, that exposed doping corruption in Russia and thereby triggered the IAAF investigation. Would you say the ban that we're now seeing is the right way to get a grip on the problem?
I think if a federation, the Russian Federation, is obviously part of the system in terms of cover-up of doping or supporting doping, then you don't have any other chance because the credibility of the whole federation is failing. So what you can do? You cannot trust the athletes. It's not the fault of the athletes themselves. It's a fault of the federation. But what you can do if you cannot guarantee a level playing field at the Olympics? So I think the only real possible decision was to say we have to suspend the Russian Federation, which means we have also to exclude Russian athletes from the Olympics.
Alan Posner, the International Olympic Committee itself is not always exactly the most upstanding organization around. How fair is it that it now turns on Russia after having awarded Russia the Winter Olympics in 2014, which now appear to have also been a scene of massive doping on Russia's part? To what extent is the IOC here somehow indirectly complicit?
Well, that's it's a difficult question for which you would have to have more knowledge than I think any of us here has. I think it's the IOC. It's known to be corrupt in its up to its very highest echelons. They've admitted such. I think we need to look very carefully at the awarding of Olympic Games in the past and in the future. I think we need to ask ourselves a lot of questions in that respect, but not the question whether, we know we know some of them were corrupt. We think the whole system is probably more corrupt than we know. So therefore, they can't make any decisions on things which we know about, like doping, which they have found out, which people like Mr. Zeppelin have found out and proven. This would be just throwing your hands up in the air and say there's no such thing as clean sport, let them go to it, which is a position you can take if you like, but then it means that the biggest criminals get the biggest prizes. That wouldn't be, a very good outcome.
Which, in fact, takes me back to my opening question to Anna-Rosa, whether we can still talk about sport in the presence of what is said to be systematic doping. Let us take a brief look at how widespread doping appears to be in Russia. Let's hear what the IAAF had to say.
Because the system in Russia has been tainted by doping from top level and down, we cannot trust that what we call and people might call clean athletes really are clean. It's a difficult task, but the systematic doping that has been ongoing in Russia, it's difficult to pick the clean athletes.
Of course, that's unjust and unfair. One of the universally recognized principles of law is that responsibility should always be personified. If some members of your family committed a crime, should all family members be held liable, including you personally?
Anna-Rosa, we just heard there the statement by the IAAF, World Athletics governing body, saying the system is tainted from the top down in Russia and referring to a very deep culture of tolerance for doping. Would you say that's true? And if so, do Russians simply see this in a way that's different, perhaps, from many of us in the West?
I haven't heard nothing about the tolerance of a Russian state to doping. It's only information of Western journalists. And the question is their sport system of the USA free of doping? Is their doping not so spread as in Russia? Is the doping not so spread in China as in Russia? It's only one country that will be made guilty, and it's Russia, because it's sort of their mode. Probably it's on the time to make Russia guilty. Is only one country that can't answer, probably.
Hajo Zeppelt, you, of course, were among those Western journalists that Anna-Rosa just referred to. As I said, your film, your series, put this matter on the table and provided a lot of the evidence that then was the basis for the investigations. Your opening statement said Russia was an egregious example. We've just heard Anna-Rosa say Russia is being singled out, and in fact, everybody does it.
That's true, that everybody does it. But the problem is to which extent. And if it's state-supported, at least, that makes a difference. We had the same problem in Germany 30 years ago, East Germany, a really huge systematic doping, state-supported, state-run system. There's no doubt. And it has to be followed up. That has to be done. And now we have not the same, but a similar situation with Russia. And I think it's really important to point the finger on that and to say this cannot be accepted in the world of sports. If we want to have a level playing field, we have to single out sports or countries. We have to name them. Otherwise, the Olympics are tainted, and you will have results no one can believe in. And the problem is, she's right when she's saying this also happens in other countries. But again, the difference is that it's not so huge, it's not so widespread, and what is also important, Mrs. Rose, is that we don't have proof. If you have proof, you can work on it.
I'm
if you
very
don't
sorry,
have proof,
but there are no proofs that
absolutely.
Russia
The World
supports
Anti-Doping Agency.
doping.
Sorry.
The state of Russia supports doping. There are no proofs
Mrs.
for
Rose, we
this.
talk about two different things, and we shouldn't distract from the facts. And I tell you clearly now that we don't talk about state-run doping. We talk about the reason for the suspension of the Russian Federation.
You have said that the state
can I
supports
continue,
doping.
please? Can I continue, please? Thank you. And it is clearly said and proven because the World Anti-Doping Agency has all the evidence, every single proof checked, in full length. There's no doubt. And for this reason, the Russian Federation has been suspended, only for this reason. Not because of state-run doping, because of the proofs which they have. And I don't know what we are discussing.
Can you give us just a couple of examples, perhaps, Hajo Seppelt, from your film in regard to, say, the complicity or active participation by coaches or possibly also by political officials?
For example, coaches who have been said that they are not working anymore in the public domain, not with athletes working anymore. Even Mr. Mutko, the Russian sports minister, claimed in an interview with me in Moscow a few weeks ago that really the most infamous coach in Russian athletics, race walking coach, is not working anymore. And we could show that exactly the opposite is true. Other coaches where have been said, oh, they are not working anymore. We find them with athletes in the forest somewhere, hidden in a forest. Excuse me, they don't do what they promise to do and what they pretend to do. That makes it complicated.
Anna Rosa?
I don't know. These proofs haven't been proved from other organizations. You are as a journalist, and this is understatement that you do now, and that it's not proved.
Yes, it's proven because it's checked by the IAAF. So what is the matter? What can you answer when I say it has been proven by the International Athletics Federation? Just give me an answer on that.
You do suggest this, but it's not a proof that it's not efficient for single out Russia in the competition, in so great competition as Olympics. It's only 2 cases that you have investigated and singled out from the picture of Russia's sports.
Ellen Posner, we've seen widespread doping, for example, among cyclists in Europe and also in the US. Are we ultimately talking here about differences in degree rather than in kind?
No, I don't think so, though with cycling, you might have a point. What has been shown with regards to Russia, not only in athletics, but in football too, now in weightlifting, we've seen it just today, is that, firstly, the federation which runs the sports actively promotes doping. That this federation is totally controlled by the state, and that the state uses the results which the athletes gain through unfair means in order to promote its own status. So it's a circular thing. And if, Mr. Putin was saying, should you, in a family, you don't all get punished if one person is a black sheep. He's right. But the point is that the main black sheep is sitting at the top of the Russian state. It's Mr. Putin himself, who runs the media, whose cronies sit in the sports minister at the same time, the chief of the football federation, whose cronies sit in all these federations and who use what their athletes do to further their own ambition. So this is why they have to hit them, because it's going to hurt them. It's also going to hurt the athletes. But it's not people like Mrs. Seppelt in Western media who are responsible for that. It's the people who make the athletes do these things who are responsible.
Absolutely. It's not the fault of the athletes. It's not. We shouldn't blame individuals. We shouldn't blame athletes. We should blame the people who are in charge of them, who are supporting them, who are forcing them to do that. And to be honest, I know that from Germany. I know that from East Germany. I wrote books about it. I made documentaries about East German doping system. It was exactly the same. Athletes have been forced by their coaches, by doctors, to use forbidden substances. This is a crime.
Anna Rosa, you mentioned that there is still some time until the Rio Olympics. The IOC is now saying there might be a possibility for individual athletes from the Russian track and field team to have individual testing done, and if they can prove they're clean, they still might be able to compete. Does that go far enough to remove what you see as scapegoating and singling out Russia?
Yes, it's enough. I think so, but probably other sportsmen have prepared for Olympics, and they haven't taken doping or so much doping, but the tests has been made 2 years ago or a half a year ago, and they are now clean, and nobody knows that they are clean and they are excluded from this competition. And so I don't think that it's probably to take the tests in this short period before the Olympics and prove if they are really clean or not.
What do you think, Kaya Zeppold? Is this a workable solution or compromise that the IOC has come up with? And should, at any rate, one person definitely be allowed to compete, namely the whistleblower who is seen in your film, Yulia Stepanova?
We have to make it very clear here. They don't talk about people who can prove that they are clean. That is not correct, because if you have a tainted system, then you have a problem to believe people that are really clean. No positive test doesn't mean automatically that you are clean in that kind of system. That is the first point. The second point is the IAAF said, and IOC confirmed that under certain circumstances, athletes who are living abroad, who are not part of the Russian sports system and not part of the Russian doping control system for years, they can ask for eligibility for the games in Rio under certain circumstances, as I said. And that is interesting. That means that there might be a back door opened for Yulia Stepanova, because she is living abroad. She has all her testing in the United States and in Germany. She's not part of the system anymore. There might be a kind of loophole or a back door for her to get in, but that is one thing. The other thing is if the IOC, whether the IOC really wants that. Because just imagine the political situation in Rio, that you have in track and field only one athlete under maybe a neutral flag, not on a Russian flag, but a Russian, but the whole team is excluded, all the others. That means from a political perspective, that it would be such an embarrassing moment for the Russian nation. So I think the IOC wants to avoid that problem. It will be a problem, so I'm not very optimistic so far that Yulia Stepanova will be allowed to compete at the Games.
Meanwhile, Anna Rosa, Sports Minister Vitaly Mutko in Russia is saying that after the IOC meeting in this week in Lausanne, we will do everything the IOC is asking. What do you think exactly that means, given the fact that this is the same sports minister we saw in Mr. Zeppold's film, apparently covering up a positive doping test by an athlete directly involved?
I trust him at the first, and at the second, I think when the Russian athletes will be excluded from the Olympics, it's a great loss for the sport, and it's a great loss for Olympic Committee, and I don't know if the American sportsmen, if the Chinese sportsmen have not been doped, and they will be laugh
but you don't have a
about
proof.
this.
Mrs. Rosa, you don't have a proof. You just claim.
I don't know.
Yeah, but if you
you
don't
say
know,
this. You say this.
I
I'm
don't say-
very sorry. You say this.
No.
You
As I
suggest
said-
this.
As I said, there are proofs. There are proofs. No more.
It's your statement.
Let
That's
us
my
take
statement.
a brief look at another issue which has also been tarnishing the image of Russia's sportsmen and their fans. Last week, Russia was threatened with exclusion from the European Soccer Championships after Russian hooligans turned violent before and during a match in Marseille. Here, too, there appear to be indications of political contacts and complicity. Let's take a look.
violence on the streets of Marseille, an apparently spontaneous riot. But some British MPs claim that the attacks by Russian hooligans were by no means random, instead organised in advance, with financial and logistical support from Russian politicians and sports officials. Why were hooligans who were known to the Russian police given permission to leave the country and attend the tournament? Why were they let on charter flights to and from France without any police interference? Afterwards, the Deputy Speaker of the Russian Parliament, Igor Lebedev, tweeted, "Well done, lads. Keep up the good work." He said these young men had defended their country's honor. Were the Russian hooligans directed by state authorities? And if so, what was Russia hoping to achieve?
Alan Posner, let us think back to the remarks by Vladimir Putin that we heard a bit earlier in the program. He talked about the politicization of sports and scapegoating of Russia. The fact is, as you said in your opening statement, doping is widespread, not only in Russia, so is hooliganism. Given the fact that East-West tensions are quite high at the moment and that we need Russia to solve important international issues like Iran, like Syria, is it perhaps time to back down a bit on all of the Russia bashing?
No one's bashing Russia. I didn't see the clip we just said as bashing Russia. I would excuse. Look, as a Brit, talk hooliganism. I mean, I'm not we have a tarnished record ourselves as Great Britain, but I don't think you ever saw a British cabinet minister or minister, responsible politician standing up and saying, "Well done, lads, you defended Britain's honour." It's always been, this is a disgrace. There's been bans on British hooligans attending matches and so on from the British state. So the point is that hooliganism is the principle of Russian politics. And that's why, of course, they feel that I don't think Russian hooligans in France are worse than what Mr. Putin is doing in Ukraine, to put it quite frankly. But if that's your idea of politics, that anything goes in the interests of greater Russia, then how can the West deal with that? Just saying, "Oh yes, okay, well, put that behind us here." We can't. We have to call a spade, a hooligan, and political aggression. What can we do?
Anna Rosa, among the hooligans who were expelled from France was the head of Russia's fan association, Alexander Sprigin. Sorry, hard to say. In the 90s, he was a leading member of the Russian neo-Nazi scene. He's known to have extensive ties to Russian politicians, including the man we just saw in that report, the legislator Igor Lebedev. So clearly, again, a political tolerance, at least, for hooliganism.
Is it a proof for what? That here is one Nazist? Or I have not understood that there...
He is known to have ties with the neo-Nazi scene in Russia.
But is it a proof of what?
A proof that apparently there is political complicity in the kind of hooliganism that we saw.
This Nazi scene in Russia is political? Is it organized from the state?
Mr. Lebedev is in the legislature, he's in the Duma, and he actually, as we saw in the report, praised the hooligans.
He's a member of one party, it's Liberal Democratic Party, and it's a very nationalist party, and it's not the state. And I would like to say that also David Cameron, haven't said, "I'm very pity, I'm very disappointed of our English fans." And nobody has said, "Oh, Cameron has not said that he is very disappointed of these events in Marseille." Putin has said that he is disappointed. Is it not the bashing of Russia?
He also seemed to have a certain pride in the fact that only 200 Russian hooligans were able to attack nearly 2,000 English fans.
It was ironical, meant.
Hi, Zeppelt. What can we expect at the World Soccer Championships that will be held in 2018 in Russia. Would you expect a lot of fans to think twice about making the trip? And should FIFA perhaps be thinking twice about whether the championship should be held in Russia?
I don't think that is the right step. I think if there is legal proof for state systematic interference in sports affairs, it means doping, for example, then we have to consider that. But hooligans, I agree with Mrs. Rose, is not a problem of Russia, and you can be 100% sure that in 2018 the Russian authorities will do everything to avoid any damage for Russia. So I think the problem will be not a big one, 2018.
Thank you very much to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to all of you out here for tuning in. See you soon.